Do you want to learn how to tune electronic fuel injection live in person with the guys from RealTuners? We have 2-day courses in dyno shops all across the country. You can register for these at RealTuners.com and click on RealTuners Live Classes. For more information or to make a reservation, go to RealTuners.com or message us on Facebook at RealTuners LLC. Now, about those classes, when are they, you might ask? June 15th and 16th, a Level 2 advanced course in Milwaukee, Wisconsin at Endless Performance. July 13th and 14th, an advanced standalone tuning class covering various ECUs at full throttle speed in Detroit, Michigan. And of course, we will be trying to schedule more classes and more dates throughout the year, so keep checking back for more info. Sometimes we have a special guest, sometimes we don't. Tonight, you're the special guest. You ask the questions, we give the answers. Anything related to these automotive obsessions of ours and how to make them go faster. And as usual, we have our normal panel of hosts. Bill Fowler of Big Hat Racing. Brian Barnhill of TunerTools.com. James Short of Shore Tuning. John Bewley of Little John's Motorsport Solutions. Mark Dalquist of Throttles Performance. Scott Clark of RealTuners.com. Scott Evans of Helix Tuning. Tom Sewell of Fuel Injector Development. Dan Parker, the movie star. He's blind in one eye and can't see out the other. And possibly a few of our previous guest hosts will pop their heads in and chat as well. And as always, thanks for tuning in. Now let's get this show on the road. Hey, welcome back, everybody. Sorry, we had a few little technical problems there. Had some new things to work out with the service we use that gets all these streams out to you guys. I had problems getting them going. Just know that they've changed some things up, and it's a little weird, and I had to figure it out on the fly because I just haven't done it this week. So anyways, we're back. We're here. We're going to have a good time tonight. Do a little question and answer service for you. Got a good little handful of us. Looks like I have Brian, John, Mark, and James here hanging out tonight. Let me bring them on so they can say hello. Hello, hello.
Hey, everybody.
What's going on?
RealTuners regrets to inform you that due to Facebook, we are now ready to end the show. Thank you. Have a great night.
We've reached our maximum allotted time for this evening.
Trying to get it started. We have reached the limit of the event, and we have to get back to you on that next week.
What a pain in the ass.
Started. I've already finished half my beer. What are we gonna do?
Drink the other half? I don't know.
But the keg's all the way upstairs.
Right.
Oh God, the problems of life.
You need a dog that can go fetch said beers for you.
Yeah, you need that Labrador. I was watching the video today this afternoon after work. Somebody sent it to me, and the guy had I think it was a golden retriever or a golden lab or whatever, yellow lab, and he had an empty beer can, and he tapped it on the table twice, and the dog went straight to the refrigerator. Opened the door, grabbed a beer, brought the beer to the table, set it down, got the empty can, took it, and it was one of those trash cans that's built into the kitchen cabinets, and he had dish towels hanging on the refrigerator and the trash can pull-out thing, and, pulled the thing out, threw the can away, and then shut the trash can back.
Yeah, that's
I was like, That's a smart dog.
It's asking a lot of my dog. My dog's name is Turbo, and we named him before we knew what he was like. And the joke is Turbo has lag. He's a good dog. He's the most lovable dog in the world, but don't ask him to do much other than take a nap and love you, because that's all he knows.
Yeah, it takes him a little while to get wound up, so he should have been named like Blower or Pro Charger.
So if you guys want to see some amazing dogs, watch the new John Wick 3 movie. A couple of
those dogs
Belgian
are trained
Malinois
so well.
I don't want to spoil the movie, so I'm not going to do anything spoiler, but they're absolutely amazing to watch, and there's a couple of things that they do as far as stunts go that those dogs actually do. It's not something that's CG or cable or anything. That's what Mals are capable of doing. It's absolutely incredible. Got to go see John Wick 3.
Yeah, I was just like jaw dropped in awe over what those dogs were doing in that movie. It was awesome.
They, I don't know if you know this, getting ready to film that, Halle Berry spent 2 to 3 hours a day for 6 months training with the dogs so that she became the trainer. So when they're on the set, when they're on scene, she's giving all the commands to the dogs and she is the trainer, which is why in the movie it looks so realistic that she's commanding them, because she actually is. So they actually became like her dogs.
Yeah. Dude, Halle Berry is a badass in that movie.
Hey, Scott Evans.
Yeah.
You need to go change your personal settings to where people who are not your friends can comment on your posts.
Interesting. Let me find that.
I'm getting PMs from people who say they're trying to comment on the feed for the podcast.
And they aren't able to? I'll figure it out.
Because they are not friends with you.
Gotcha. Let me try to figure that out. You guys keep talking. I'll work on it.
Tuning's way easier than this Facebook thing.
Yeah, the Facebook is what's being the problem.
Yeah.
But also, if we had individual posts in the RealTuners, it might help.
Yeah, I think this is all generating it from Scott's personal Facebook page here.
Jimmy No Care, yes, I've seen the videos. Also, there's a great interview with her on the the Tonight Show that came up where they talk about it. She actually broke 3 ribs practicing for the movie. She broke 3 ribs in training or whatever, doing her own stunts. So yeah, she's a badass, like you said. And she's like 50, isn't she, or close to it or something?
She's getting up there.
Yeah, and still smoking.
Well, yeah. She is pretty hot.
So maybe now they can get to it?
Maddie Vaughn says Zuckerberg's revenge. Tim Meyer asked, what's better, tuning off spark plug readings or tuning by ET and mile per hour? I always, if I'm tuning, I watch the mile per hour, but keep an eye on the plugs so you don't hurt something. But, ideally mile per hour will show it because, you should start out conservatively and work your way up. And when you quit gaining mile per hour, that's it. That's it. ET is more a function of traction and gearing, so you can't really watch ET. I mean, that's more chassis and tire, but mile per hour will always show tuning changes, or it should show tuning changes. And if you aren't seeing a mile per hour change, you're either past the point of no return, or there's something else going on. There's a point where you could run into the aerodynamic brick wall, and a little minor change in power isn't going to change your mile per hour because it's just not going to go any faster. But mile per hour is the indicator, and then keep an eye on your plugs. At least that's my opinion.
And by the time it slows down, usually you're well too far into it.
Yeah, just go until it quits gaining. Don't go until it goes the other direction. Once it quits gaining, that's it. But I also always, tell people fix the 60 foot first. And some of these turbo cars I don't understand, they'll run like a 720 in the quarter mile at 290 miles an hour and they'll have a 3 second 60 foot. I mean, I'm exaggerating to make a point, but some of these cars, it's like they can't get out of their own way until they're past the 8th mile mark. And, I really don't quite understand that, but I'm sure there's a reason for it.
Well, a lot of times it's just improper gearing and converter choice for most people.
Yeah.
A lot of times guys are running, they've believed in the bullshit that's been spewed for years and years that, you need to run a tall gear in a turbo car. That way you can load the motor up. So they believe that bullshit. So they go and they put a 300 gear in it. And then they've got a 10.5-inch converter that won't flash 2,800 RPM. So, and then they put a cam in it that's like 250 at 50. So the thing's got to be, it takes 600 feet for the motor to get to 5,500 RPM where the cam starts working. And then it burns the back half of the track up, but it don't do much in the first half.
See, I knew somebody could explain it to a simpleton like me.
Well, yeah, I've been dealing with this shit for like 5 years now with this, trying to dispel all these internet myths and rumors about turbo cars.
We've had guys that they started with what they thought was the right gearing, and then when they get to the end of the trap and they're worried about their RPM, and we've actually put more gear in the car and it went faster and trapped exactly the same RPM because the converter tightened up as it went because it had the right gearing in it. It's a matter of finding what gear it likes.
Jay Blanchard makes a good point too. That as you fix the chassis and get the car to leave harder, your mile per hour can actually go down for the same or lower ET. That is correct. But if you're making tuning changes to the engine, whether you're timing or fueling or playing with parts, whether you're changing intake manifold, whatever you're doing, headers, if you're making tuning changes to the engine and you don't change the chassis, you can use mile per hour as a gauge. But as soon as you start working on the chassis, yes, that can affect mile per hour, absolutely. And the harder the car leaves, yes, there is a point where you will actually lose mile per hour. Or rephrase that, if you have a horrible 60 foot with lots of wheel spin, the car can actually mile per hour artificially high. I learned this doing speed runs with snowmobiles. The more time you take to accelerate the same distance, the higher the mile per hour is for a given amount of horsepower. Meaning, if you set it up where it's dead hooked and accelerating hard, and you hit, your maximum acceleration before the end of the 1,000-foot mark or the quarter mile, your mile per hour won't be as good as if you have a little bit of wheel spin and don't maximize the ET. I don't quite understand the relationship, but I do know that as you hook it harder, mile per hour will come down a little bit.
It has to do with the RPM of the engine. The higher the RPM of the engine hits by the time you get to the end, the more mile an hour you're gonna have by gearing. So that a little bit of wheel spin in the beginning means that when it does grab, the distance where it actually grabs that is closer to the starting line than if it hooked and just went, right? So when it spins and finally grabs, you're that much already up on it versus where you started at before. And so by that nature, let's say you launch at 4,000 RPM and you spin a little, and your converter grabs at $5,000. But if you spin a little and it grabs at $6,000, and you're already there, it's going to keep pulling through it, and your RPM may end up at 7,200 instead of 7,000 through the traps if you dead hook. Your ET will be lower, but it has more time to accelerate.
I'm talking on something that's gearing optimized and traction optimized.
Right, but the wheel spin is non-optimized, is the catch. The wheel spin is what makes it have a higher mile an hour.
Let me rephrase it. Something that leaves a little more gently can mile per hour better than something that leaves harder at certain times. But ideally, you want it to leave as hard as possible, accelerate as hard as possible, give you the lowest elapsed time and the highest mile per hour.
Right. And when you are tuning by mile an hour, make it get down the track. Make sure it goes down twice in the same setting. That's conservative on the timing. And then leave everything the same and just repeat it. And then repeat it, add a little more timing, repeat it, add a little more timing, repeat it. That way the only thing that is changing is the timing. Obviously make sure air fuel is consistently in the range that you want at the air fuel you're commanding, but make sure that's the only thing that changes.
And I think the real takeaway here is regardless of what method you're tuning, whether it's mile an hour, dyno, whatever, understand both when it makes a gain and when it doesn't, why, and was that good or safe and everything else. So if it picked up power and you don't know why, that's not good in the end, because I've seen some guys do that too. It's like, oh, it picked up power. Cool, leave it.
So, John, this leads into this discussion. Andy Netherland asks, at 1,200 to 1,300 rear wheel horsepower, 3,250 pounds, turbo LS with a power glide, 28-inch tall tire, that's the limiting factor, 369 gear, running on marginally prepped tracks, what first gear ratio, starting line ratio would you recommend?
180.
Where was that at, Mark?
That's on Mixler.
That's on Mixler. Let me go read that shit because I couldn't remember half that crap.
But basically, John, it's my old setup, and he's asking what first gear to put in the power glide. 180.
He never bothers to say what tire it's on.
Just a 28.
But is it a bias ply or is it a
bias
radial?
or a slick?
Because they don't need the same starting line ratio.
Right.
So is it a radial or is it a slick? Because I'm not doing the same starting line ratio between those two tires.
Blair, what range of RPM are changing the timing for with this technique? Peak torque and above, or the entire range? I'm sorry, Blair, I don't even understand the question.
He's asking if you're doing the tuning for mile an hour using timing changes, and timing is the only thing you're changing. What range of your table are you using to do that? And the answer is, basically all of it.
It's either all of it, or if you've gotten to the point where you feel like you're starting to stress the head gasket, you go above peak torque and start putting it in on only above peak torque.
Yeah.
So you have to, if you've got a coolant pressure,
you're far better. You're far better doing this on a dyno. Just going to say it. If you're trying to get after it to that point, put it on a dyno. You save yourself so much money, frustration, time. Just put it on a dyno.
To an extent, though, the dyno can only do so much, and when you take it to the track, it's going to be a slightly different load. So there's always a little improvement, and that's what people are usually looking for when they're tuning.
No, I don't even mean a chassis dyno. I mean an engine dyno. Put it on an engine dyno. Find out what timing it makes peak torque at, what timing it makes best power at, and that's it. The track isn't going to change that.
I'll jump in on that one. Chassis dynos work. You just have to make sure tire slip is a constant instead of a variable, for one. And two, if it's a converter car, you have to map RPM versus wheel speed, because I've seen instances where increasing engine power and torque will show a lower number on the dyno because it's blowing through the converter more. So that's where wheel speed versus RPM will show that the converter is charging more, but potentially showing a lower number on the dyno.
On that starting line ratio one, he says he has a Mickey Thompson pro bracket radial.
Yeah, just put a 180 in it. That's a 6.6 starting line ratio, and that'll be fine for a radial. You sure as hell don't need to go, if the car made more power, I'd say 158, but that power level, you don't need any more than about 6.5, 6.4. So
on a marginal track, a 158 or 160 might make it a little more manageable, but it's going to be a little bit dog.
If he's using,
That's nothing. That's nothing traction control won't take care of.
Yeah, that's exactly it. If he's using the bracket radial, it's perfect for a marginal track, and you can hit it pretty hard and knock a little timing out and use timing as your control, and it works great all day long. Tracks that
all right,
12-second cars
John,
are having problems getting down.
Here's a fun one for you. Kyle Ilchi says unlimited budget LS turbo build. What parts turbo block and white? Well, it's called Noonan.
My email address is ljmsjohn@gmail.com. If you've got an unlimited budget, we can start this conversation with a $30,000 deposit check sent to 2049 Philly at True Lane, Bardstown, Kentucky 40004. But I know you're broke because you just bought a new motor for your boat. So unlimited budget.
Money does make it easier.
Brandon Dollar wants to know if there's something that we could talk about without charts and graphs about setting up fuel pressure compensation and ollie.
Sure. I'll tell everybody the first thing is go to the RealTuners website, download the webinar. It's cheap. It's easy. It explains everything in super detail, along with a spreadsheet to help you do the math of it. The basic idea behind it is that as fuel pressure changes and boost changes, if it doesn't follow 1-to-1, if boost goes up by 3 pounds, fuel pressure should go up by 3 pounds as well. If it doesn't follow directly, then the amount of fuel you're putting into the engine is going to be different. So if boost goes up 3 pounds and fuel pressure didn't move at all, then you're 3 pounds in deficit on fuel pressure for what it needs to be for consistent fueling. The way it's done is in an advanced table, a little bit of math, and what it does is adds or subtracts based on what it's supposed to be. So it looks at it and it says if you're, 15 pounds of boost with a 43 base, then it's looking for, it's looking for 58 pounds of fuel pressure with 15 pounds of boost, basically, if you start at 43. So if it doesn't follow that, if it falls below, it's going to add fuel to keep up. It's basically doing the injector math to make the fuel pulse exactly the same regardless of what the fuel pressure is.
Frank Rios says, and I love this question, what's the pros and cons of a cam that has more duration and lift on the intake than the exhaust on a turbo car? Well, if you need more duration and lift on the intake on a turbo car than the exhaust, you got something fucked up with your combination. That's my personal opinion. Take that for what it can be. John, do you have anything to add?
I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention. I'm getting blown up with PMs and other distracting things. What was it?
What are the pros and cons of a cam that has more duration and lift on the intake than the exhaust on a turbo car?
Nothing. That's some bullshit 90s old school technology that is no longer valid with today's turbine technology.
Yeah, that's when turbos sucked.
Welcome to 1992 with your reverse split cams. Anybody that does a reverse split cam today, in my opinion, doesn't know what they're doing.
Andy Mensch, when is a nitrous spec cam needed? I'm going to go out on a limb and say when you're running nitrous.
Usually most, depends on the engine family. An LS3, a camshaft is designed to work in an LS3 or LS7 will see an acceptable return on a naturally aspirated cam with nitrous up to about a 200 shot. Something, let's say, for example, a Cathedral Port LS engine, they start seeing gains run out on naturally aspirated design cams about 125 to 150. So if you have just, small block Fords, 125, 150. So
basically, if you need to do more than 150 shot, you should probably spec a cam that works a little better for nitrous.
Depending on engine family, 150 to 200 shot is the general rule of thumb on a small block. If you plan on spraying more than that, then the camshaft vents should be adjusted to work properly with the nitrous.
And I will apologize to our listeners. I'm feeling heavily sarcastic tonight. It's been a long week already, so just bear with me.
Wait, that's different than normal?
Oh, I'm more sarcastic than normal tonight.
Well, doesn't the sorrows of the wheel mounting machine isn't that balanced out by the arrival of new speakers to be starting to work with on home theater stuff?
That fucking wheel balancer. What a piece of fucking junk. Don't even get me started. Hey, Scott, Justin Carpenter says that some of the webinar videos aren't working right. Some of them are very short and not what's in the title. So we might want to look into that if we can at some point. And
some of them are
says,
purposely very short. I think some of them are only like 15 minutes. Some of them are much longer. I know that the couple of the main ones are like an hour or 2 hours long. There's a bunch of small ones that are very short ones.
Supercar says, is that fuel pressure comp table, the fuel pressure compensation table, the same as using injector pressure differential versus flow?
No, this is not a compensation for, well, yes and no. What the injector differential versus flow is typically something you see in the stock ECU, and it's designed because they have a fixed rail pressure that doesn't go up and down, and that's what that's for. It's kind of similar, but it's a broader scope, and it's looking at it as if it's not following exactly correct as the amount of pressure rises by the same amount that boost rises, it'll add or subtract accordingly. Some ECUs have this built in. In the Holley, you have to add it yourself. I think like Haltech has it built in, if I remember right. James, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yep.
It does.
And then you have, like your Motec and Mtron and the upper end stuff. Most of those guys have it. I think the Mega Squirt has it in it. I think, I'm trying to think who else has it built in.
Link can do it, but you might have to set it up. I don't remember if it's natural in there.
Yeah. I don't know how many of our listeners know what a Link ECU is, but it's a good ECU.
Yeah.
It's a little pricey.
Well, I mean,
Justin-
Link's
Justin-
cheaper than Haltech.
Justin was saying some of the videos are like, one's like 2 minutes, one's like 5 minutes. So kind of the difference between like foreplay and no foreplay.
Gotcha. We will do some investigation. I don't have the correct permissions to fix that. The guy who does is busy working this week, and he'll get to it when he can get to it.
Yeah, and the same thing for the Holley startup video, Justin. That's there's not a lot we can do with that one. Or Camp 78. Camp 78 says the fuel pressure webinar has never worked right for him. All the others work perfect.
Interesting. We will do a little research and try to find that out. I probably won't have an answer right away. It's going to take us a few days to figure that out. Maybe by the next podcast we'll have an answer.
Andy Mensch was wondering what your thoughts are on nitrous distribution with an LS plate kit on a stock LS2 intake manifold. I've been told that over 200 horse, the front two cylinders will be lean.
Well, the thing you got to remember is your nitrous side is in addition to your already flowing air side. So those front two cylinders typically tend to be the first ones. It has to make a pretty hard curve to get into them. So unless the manifold is designed in a way to make it flow into those evenly, it tends to be the leanest anyways. And then adding nitrous to it is just more of a, it's just exaggerating it.
If you want a visual representation of what Scott was just talking about, go to the Performance Design website and look at their Holley high ram top that they built. It's a carbon fiber top for the high ram, and look at the differences between that and the Holley, and look at specifically the short side radius and see what they did there, and you'll start to understand why the front two cylinders become a problem. Ronnie Jones, pro-charged big block Chevy, single plane intake with a 90-degree elbow. Is it necessary, or is there any advantage to having a divider in the elbow to direct airflow? Anything that causes turbulence is going to be a bad deal. I think the divider is so that when it exits into the plenum, you've got two short sides instead of, you're coming off of the, how do I explain this? I'm not very good at putting this to words. I don't like the divider in the middle. I would rather work on the plenum exit with radiuses on the bottom edge of the plenum. So where it goes into the plenum, everything has a smooth transition to the runner roofs. I think that's where the advantage is going to be. I don't think a divider is going to do much for you. I would have to do some more testing, or I would have to do a lot of testing to prove that. I'm just going by what my gut feeling is. I don't know. Have you seen anything testing with that, John or Scott?
I've never really delved into that too much. I always just put the non-divider hat on them, so I don't really know.
Yeah, they're garbage. I hate single plane intakes. Distribution sucks. Put the correct EFI intake on the motor. Be done with it. The divider ones usually do have better distribution than the non-divider ones, though, especially if you have a high air mass traveling through the system. The lower the power and the lower the airspeed going through the elbow, the less of an issue it's going to be. But if you've got a 4150 elbow that's non-divided and you're trying to shove 150 pound a minute of air through it, you're going to have a distribution problem, especially if it's one of those stupid ass Edelbrock ultra low profile ones that's on like a 1/2 inch center line for the inside of the radius.
Hey, John, are you outside right now?
No, I'm not. I've got my fan on because it's hot as hell in my office. It's probably blowing right across the microphone.
Yes, that's what I was doing.
Better.
I apologize. I'll turn it away from the microphone.
You had giblet robot voice kind of going on.
Yeah.
Well, I was, the fan sitting on my desk and the microphone was between me and the fan. So it was like it's like trying to talk in the back of one of the old oscillating fans for robot voice.
See, this is what RealTuners does for you people. We put ourselves in physical dire jeopardy to bring you the show. I mean, poor John is about ready to pass out from, heat exhaustion, but he's still here giving you advice. So just remember that.
I forgot the damn pre-programmed thermostat set to go up like 6 degrees at 7:00 tonight. Now I didn't go down and bump it down to let it know and manually change it because I was still here. So I had to run, go down and do that. I realized that when it got hot.
Dwight Charlie, how much of a difference does batch versus sequential injection? Is it actually worth it to switch, especially in motorsports applications? Well, there's several different ways to look at it. If you're running the injectors up at 90% duty cycle, 85% duty cycle, something like that, there's almost no difference at all. But when you get the injectors down into the 40%, 50%, there absolutely is a difference. And think about it in terms of intake valve timing. For your intake valve isn't open 85, 90% of the time. Your intake valve is maybe open 28, 29% of the time. So if you're sitting there spraying fuel, 2 to 3 times more than the intake valve is open, all you're really doing is wetting the intake manifold down and giving time for the fuel to drop out of suspension. So if you are running your injectors up at 85%, 90%, you're not going to notice a difference at wide open throttle. Now, your part throttle stuff, your cruising, all that, that's where you're going to notice a pretty significant difference, batch and sequential. So if you want to go to oversized injectors and you want to work on injection timing events like cam timing, and you want to go after that, yes, there are gains to be had, but they are minimal compared to let's just say there's lower hanging fruit to be had.
Yeah, I was gonna say, depending on your application, like if you're I'll use a Miata for example, because first gen Miatas are batch. it's depending on your application. If you're doing something with a lot of transient throttle, a lot of mid throttle and not high injector pulses, like you're saying, and a lot of acceleration and transient stuff like road racing or autocrossing, I think there's a little bit more there. You're not going to say pick up horsepower, but you might pick up some drivability and some mile an hour on corner exit and stuff like that. But yeah, it really depends on what your application is on. Is that big enough to go after? If you're spending a lot of time on wide open throttle and you're just looking for minor gains, probably not. But if you're on off throttle all the time and looking for that, then that's a little bit different of an argument. And I can tell you a first gen Miata sequential versus batch on a road course is huge noticeable difference. Pedal fill and noticeable lap time drop in the end of the day, which is what we care about.
I was gonna say road racing is the one time that I think that makes the biggest difference because of the throttle transition.
Yeah, so it comes down to everything. People ask tuning questions, and 90% of the time I get asked a question, my first response is, "What are you doing with this?"
If you're just drag racing with it, you got to remember you're primarily going to be wide open all the time, and for a large portion, depending on your injector size, you are going to be well beyond the point where it makes any bit of difference for when it sprays. A lot of people think about the whole injection timing thing, and if you're doing sequential, by the time you're up at 40 or 50% of injector duty cycle, you're already open past the time the valve is open anyways, then it doesn't matter. So as soon as you overcome the amount of time the valve is open by spraying the injector for longer than that time, there's no longer any benefit to it.
Yeah,
and where we start seeing the benefit is you've got to be under, that 48, 47% duty cycle at full RPM, full load. So if you're up around 50%, 55%, 60% duty cycle, there really isn't any change with injector timing or any benefit then to sequential. It's really when you get under that 47, 45% duty cycle. So again, maybe some of your low speed drivability can be affected, things like that. But as far as wide open throttle, not really.
Yeah. And on the engine dyno, it's the small amount we're talking about is like 1%, 2% gains. It's not here's 10 horsepower. It's so small that you can literally play with, and I've done this a few times, you can play with your injector end angle on a dyno, and you can set it and make a pull and start really, really low, like 2,000 RPM low, and start and go. And you can do it again, and then you can do it again, and just keep changing it. And by the time you get up to where you're at 3,000 RPM, the differences are no longer seen. Like it's literally little sliver down low.
There is a beloved RealTuners stalker / moron that is out there spewing that injector end angle is worth like huge gains.
Right.
I don't want to say any names, but
oh my God, don't even get started on this bullshit, boy.
Hey, I just said moron. Everybody knows who that is.
I heard it blows up engines really good.
Any advice on tuning Magnuson style blower versus a turbo on an LS?
I do exactly this. Your transient boost is much different. That's the biggest thing. And again, depending on application, there's some things to watch for. Transient on a drift car where the bypass valve opens, don't let that catch you unaware and let your engine stall in the middle of a top 16. That's a little bit of an embarrassing story, but it was one of those when you talk about load changes at a track. I think it's 6 different things had to happen at once for us to find this condition, and we did it. Never during practice, never during qualifying, only during competition. And it took 5 seconds to fix. But that bypass valve is really good on drivability. Don't wire it shut just because that's what the internet tells you to do. But it's in the end of the day, what cam and what head you're running on that is going to make more of a difference as far as what it wants for timing. Other than the Magnuson's going to run hotter, your IAT is going to heat soak. So have a good coolant strategy there. So it's a drag car.
Throw a good intercooler on the car. If your class allows it.
You're right. We run a retardedly expensive CTSV heat exchanger from CSR on the front of our car because it was the biggest that we could get, and we paid CTSV premium price for that thing. It's worth twice as much, or costs twice as much as our radiator. Whether it's worth that or not, it's debatable. But there's a couple things. We actually set our ECU up to run the water pump and the heat exchanger system even when the car is off in staging and we're pushing it, because that keeps the laminate overcores from heat soaking. And while that intake temp will heat soak, as soon as we kick the car on and get some air moving on that, that was enough to make a difference of about 25 to 30 degrees in starting IATs on a drift run, which drag will be approximately the same thing. And a 20 degree difference in a starting IAT on that car, because we're not running an icebox, is the difference is a 60 degree difference at the end of our run. And that's not minuscule as far as safety and power. So that's the biggest thing on the Magnuson, was watching for heat soak and heat in general.
Hey, would you look at the time? It's time to wrap this up. It only feels like it's been a half-hour show tonight.
We won't do that to him quite yet.
Hey, Supercar says if you're using batch fuel and wasted spark, you're going to run into problems using ignition cut two-step. I don't think that the batch fuel is going to get you, but the wasted spark, especially with a long duration camshaft, can bite you in the butt. That's, again, my opinion.
A lot of it's going to depend on coils and, what RPM you set in your two-step at. So, how much your coils actually have enough time to dwell and charge properly, and a lot of stuff there. We've done it on a lot of JZ and RV cars. So it's usually under 4,000 RPMs on the two-step. But we're not running long duration cams on those.
DEFCON says, has anyone messed with an AEM Infinity? If you have any thoughts on that system.
I have, and it's okay. It has things that I don't like and things that I really like. It's fine. I don't really have a bias one way or the other about it. I've used it, and like I said, it's fine. You just got to figure out if it has all the ins and outs that you need. Functionality-wise, it's great. It does everything that everybody else's does.
I'm not a huge fan of it, but I mean, it does work.
Yeah, that's what I said. It's fine. I'm kind of not really biased. I've only done a couple, and they've worked on the vehicles that I've used them on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to say the biggest thing is its software tends to be some of the buggier and just more not user friendly. It's reskin software in the end for those that aren't familiar with how AEM does stuff. It's a GEMS or GEMS software. There's a few little headaches. It feels more like coding in some cases when you're having to dig in and do non-supported triggers and stuff like that. So, if you don't have a lot of experience, it's not my recommendation. And, if you're just trying to get something that, you can get on and off quickly, probably not my recommendation, but they do work. Just spend the time to learn it would be my one thing on the AEM.
Is there an ECU out there besides Motec that you guys know of that allows the user to build logic?
Adaptronic.
Yep. Describe your definition of logic as well. How detailed are you looking for?
Yeah.
Right, because even the Holly allows, to do some pretty
basic
custom,
logic, yes.
Yep.
Yeah, Heltec will let you do the same too with some of the timers and stuff like that.
Say, Mtron.
Say, Brian, going back to the wasted spark, he says, what issues can it cause? Backfiring possibly. 4,250 RPM. It's a 2JZ.
2J shouldn't be too bad. The stock coils they're sort of notorious for being being weak or prone to failure. It's not as bad as people say. That the problem is, people are pulling these cars out of junkyards for 99% of the engines. And especially when they're pulling 1Js that came from Japan and who knows how long they sat on a boat. the coils get beat up pretty bad. So on the stock coils, they're just not the strongest coil to start with. You start running into breakup issues around 600-700 horsepower typically. So if you start leaning on those harder on a coil that's already more prone to fail, you're obviously not doing it any favors. And you could get typically it'll be a misfire. I suppose if you have a dwell issue, they could auto discharge. I'm not familiar with UJGZ coils doing that. That is a problem with an LS coil, a factory truck coil. When you over dwell them, I believe an LS truck or LS coil auto discharges at something around 4.5 milliseconds.
The truck coils will. The other ones will auto discharge, but it takes upwards of like 6 or 7, as I understand it.
Okay, yeah, I know the IGN 1As can run forever, but some of the LS coils, I see it a lot of. There was a couple ECUs that were their factory dwell was like 5 or 6 milliseconds, and they were like, "Yeah, our LS coils misfire all the time," and turn dwell down, and surprise, it goes away. But yeah, the biggest thing on the 2J is just the stock coils aren't the best, depending on what they are. They work okay. They're not as bad as some people make them out to be. The good news is there's like 20 coil options for you, including plug and play R35 coils or, Toyota coils, which are one of my preferred ones if you're running a lot of power, an IGN 1A coil or something like that. But that's wasted spark on 2-step up there. Shouldn't be too bad of an issue. Just make sure that the dwell in the ECU is set right, and remember that you have half the amount of time to let those dwell properly. So make sure they don't overheat and melt the coils or the igniter.
RealTuners train track in the background.
Yeah, that's me. I'm at the shop tonight. I'm not at home. So you're getting all the background noise, and I didn't bother to mute myself. So, yeah, you get to listen to it too.
Zach Parker, yes.
My little $70 Best Buy microphone is picking up the train.
Yeah.
What else we got? Come up with something, or I'm going to start talking about tire balancers.
All right, I'm back to paying attention now.
I still don't know what fuel we're running in the drift car. I hate it, but I think we're going to wind up on a race ethanol because just no one makes a good unleaded fuel that fits our application. That isn't $22 a gallon. I need to put that in there.
What's wrong with like VP 100?
Nothing. That's about what we're running now. We're running Renegade 102. It really comes down to we're at the point where the debate, we know we're giving some power up on fuel. And there's just enough where the debate is, do we want more octane as we go up and boost a little bit?
Then just put C12 in it.
Yeah, that's honestly, I think the biggest thing is I need to get an ice box in the car, because that's really my concern is just IATs aren't bad, but they get just close enough that it makes me not worried, but anxious.
Well, then just put a big reservoir somewhere in the system. Go put an ice box in the trunk, put the intercooler core on its own circuit, put the heat exchanger on its own circuit, and get a dedicated pump for the heat exchanger and put a bigger heat exchanger on.
So the biggest, all the stuff's on its own circuit already. It just needs a bigger heater circuit, or a bigger heat exchanger, or not heat exchanger, but a
bigger reservoir tank.
Yeah. He's running that was
it takes nothing to add an extra gallon.
Yep, and that was our huge argument. He wanted it in the engine bay, all this other stuff, and it finally
blah.
Yeah, dude. I finally learned why he just had a misread of the rules, and that's why we had such an argument. And it finally came to the point where it was like, you know what? I don't know which one of us to be mad at, because this is as much my fault for not realizing where your confusion was. But yeah, it's definitely going to be. I think honestly, that's we shouldn't spend more on fuel, and I don't want to run ethanol. So I'm going out there to do testing next month, and I think I'm just building a big reservoir, putting in there, dumping a ton of ice, and then saying, hey, look, this is what happens. You don't have to spend any more money. And I know that alone will convince him of that. Rory,
we had a listener say if there's been any updates from Chad Reynolds on the drag challenge. So I just sent a PM to Chad, and I'll see if he has anything to say about that. So we'll see if he gets back to me. Rory Somerville, is there a horsepower crossover where switching to methanol over E85 is worth it in terms of fuel system upgrade? I am not the right person to answer this because I hate ethanol fuels.
I'm not allowed to run methanol in 90% of the stuff I work on. So
what's the question again?
Is there a horsepower crossover we're switching? I think he's wondering at what power level does methanol become worth it in terms of the fuel system upgrade? Meaning, you've got obviously methanol, you use more fuel than you do with E85, so you would need more fuel pump and more injector and more this and more that.
Yep.
But
I tell people build it basically the same. Use all PTFE or the stainless stuff because both those fuels will be stable in that stuff and will be less problematic. Either way, depending on what you're doing, you still have to get the engine up to a certain temperature to burn off contaminants, and the contaminants typically are what make all your problems with everything. So you still have to get both hot enough to clean everything. Both typically still want some of the maintenance issues. If you drive E85 all the time and you get good E85, you typically don't have as much maintenance issues as what a lot of people do when they just park their race car with it in it all the time and don't drive it often. The methanol side, I tell people, if you're going to go methanol, be sure to build a gas tune and be sure to basically run it before you store it, because it'll eat some shit up while it's just sitting there and it'll cause you a lot of headaches. So you gotta go through and every time you go to the track, switch back over to gas before you put it in the trailer to store it for a couple weeks till the next time you go to the track. Obviously, if you go to methanol, the decision becomes, when are you making enough horsepower that you really need to switch to a mechanical pump? And usually it's pretty low on methanol. So if you're making 1,000 horsepower with E85 and you want to make that same 1,000 horsepower with methanol, you need to go mechanical. You can do it with two really big electric pumps, but it's a lot of headache and a lot of work, and you're going to find that you have a lot of problems. It's just a please don't.
Just
the
don't.
bigger question is,
if it's on M1 period, it should be on a belt driven pump, even if it's naturally aspirated on a carburetor.
Yep, I pretty much agree with that. I mean, pretty much it comes down to, if you want to switch to methanol, upgrade everything. Is it worth it? Depends on how much faster you're trying to go or what you're trying to do with it. If you're taking away all the weight of the car and switching to methanol because you can go up there without any cooler and go up without any intercooler and you save 500 pounds worth of plumbing and pieces and parts, maybe it's worth it because you gain that back in ET. I mean, are you racing
I don't
classes?
think it's necessarily a horsepower reason to change, right? It's that the car needs it because of other reasons, whether it's, cooling or debt or whatever. And if it's just knock limit, I think there's better fuels to do C16 or whatever, or race ED5s if you're already on E85.
yeah, he says yes, 1,000 horse on E85 going to 1,500 horse on an 88 millimeter.
Yeah, you better be on a mechanical.
Even on E85, he needs to be on mechanical.
Chad Reynolds got back to me. He said that he can't talk tonight. He's got meetings that he's in right now, but he was wondering if he could call in next week and tell us about Drag Challenge. And I asked him if there's anything he'd like me to say. He says, tell everyone it was awesome and lots of work. We had a great time. Moonshine Missile turned out killer, and we're looking forward to racing it. I might be able to get Lyle and or Biggin to call in next week too, if that's good. So possibly we could do a Drag Challenge update next week.
C16 is apparently banned in Australia. You guys get some cool stuff, and the weirdest stuff is banned. like atmospheric blow-off valves, any blow-off valve that makes extra noise.
C16 is banned in Australia. Wow.
Yeah.
That's enough to make me want to move. I mean, I think C12 is the greatest race fuel that's ever been built for general purpose, but there are times where you just exceed the limits of C12, and then you need C16. C14, in my opinion, is a shitty fuel. And of course, you've got C23 and things like that for extreme applications. And I don't speak anything other than VP, the Rocket and the Sunoco and that other stuff. I don't know. I pretty much stick with VP.
Actually, C12 is a lot cheaper than I thought too.
C12 is a great fuel. It's absolutely a great fuel. As long as you don't.
There's a VP distributor 20 minutes from my house that sells even E85 by the barrel, and I've been driving an hour to pick up pump E85, so I feel like an idiot. But they apparently keep C12 and everything there, so we might try some of this in the drift car.
Well, Andy Minch wants to know the thoughts on Motorsports 109 on a stock bottom end Nitrous LS. At that price point, I would just look at C12.
Yeah, unless for some reason you can't run the fuel in your class, then MS 109 is great on the NA stuff I've run it on. But
some people don't like the C12 because it's leaded. But I've never had it. I've never had an issue with O2 sensors. I mean, I've never.
That was our conversation last week, and like I was looking at the VP 110 leaded, and the problem is we were worried about how much fuel we dump on rev limit. We do have fuel cut, but it does dump some unburned fuel. And how bad is that really going to kill O2 sensors? We're okay replacing them when we have to, but if we're doing, a pair or two an event, that still gets pricey.
Justin Franz asks, have you ever seen injector duty cycle rise as fuel temp rise? Yep, sure have. Cheap Chinese injectors that are CNG body and not actually fuel injectors. So if you bought cheap Bosch 220s off of somebody, they probably snookered you, and you do not have a liquid fuel injector. You have a compressed natural gas injector, and what you are seeing is the body of the injector swell. The actual orifice inside the injector shrinks, and that is your fuel injection system trying to keep your, raising your injector duty cycle to keep your AFRs in check.
Yeah, just saying something is a Bosch injector, or having the whole, it's made in the same factory, it's a Bosch body. Yeah, sure it was, but different application, different QA. I've actually got, a story we can tell about that in a second of, sensors made in the same factory. But yeah, don't say it's just a Bosch. A Bosch is a Bosch is a Bosch, because there's a lot of stuff out there, and a lot of guys will try to swindle you every chance they get. There's a lot of good cheap injectors out there. Tom sells some amazing injectors that we've had great luck with.
Just to be clear, all of those 200-pounder, 210, 2200 cc, whatever all these different companies call them anymore, they're all compressed natural gas injectors. The difference is the OEM Bosch ones, the actual real deal Bosch ones, not the one that fell off the truck or in Mexico or whatever other third world country they come from. The real deal ones that actually have, legit date and legit part number and are legit don't have the flow issues. Now, the old 160 compressed natural gas injector that is basically the LS1 height 60 millimeter injectors. Don't quote me, but I think it ends, it's a 0280, 158, 827, I think is the part number. Those are the ones that Injector Dynamics even used to sell as ID 1600s. That's before a lot of your all's time. They recalled all those injectors because of that same issue. The orifice would swell with fuel temperature, and the flow rate would reduce as much as 50%. So,
my bad, Jake. I'm sorry I didn't get it exactly right, and you had the opportunity to call bullshit on something. Fuck off.
Wow.
Justin McMurdy says mid 30 pounds of boost on E85. What spark plug? A 7 or an 8 heat range? if you have a question, always start with the colder one. If you have issues, you can always go warmer. But if you start with too hot, well, it might be really expensive to go colder after you have to put the engine back together.
Usually you just knock the
Always
strap
start
off of it.
Yeah, well,
I mean, granted, that thing can bounce around and cause all kinds of dings and dents and problems, but usually if you're too hot, it'll knock the strap off of the thing.
right, but it's a lot safer to just start out cold.
I agree 100%. And I get this question a lot, specifically on, methanol stuff or even E85 stuff. Everybody's like, oh, run a hotter plug, yada, yada, yada. Why? The only reason you run a hot plug is to keep the carbon buildup burnt off. So with any ethanol or alcohol type fuels, you're not going to have that deposit like you do on gas. So there's no real reason to keep anything cleaned off. Why would you want to run a glow plug in your turbo motor or nitrous motor or whatever? Run the coldest plug that you can start the thing up with. Now, I'm not saying go out and buy heat range 12 plugs to put in your 600 horsepower, 78, 75 turbo 5.3. But at the same time, you don't have to run TR6s or even some of the 7 heat range plugs. I like starting off 8s, 9s, whatever, to see where things start off at. So
Zach Parker asks, which aftermarket injectors do you guys actually trust? Well, Zach, as Tom Sewell of Fuel Injector Development as part of RealTuners, we absolutely would say to go to Fuel Injector Development. Tom will shoot you straight. You can't go wrong with going to Tom. Genuine Bosch injectors, none of the gray market stuff, none of the
China specials.
Yeah, none of the copycats. The other thing is, and let me finish. You're not going to go wrong with Injector Dynamics. They're extremely good. They're the same, quality that they've always been. You get the ID. I mean, you technically can't buy an ID injector anywhere else because they have ID stamped on the body, but you pay for the ID. So, but as far as trusting them, absolutely, I trust an ID injector. I wouldn't have any problems running an ID injector. But I also, I would tell people that we recommend the FID, the Fuel Injector Development, and Tom is a great guy to get a hold of, and he'll take the time to listen to you and make sure that you have the right product. So those would be the two that I would trust.
Yep. Big shout out for Tom here too. I've got his 2750s in my personal car, and there's a bunch of cars here in the shop that are rocking his injectors too. So
yeah, I'd say 90% of our cars and that we built did, and our FD car does, my personal car does, all Tom stuff, and had zero problems with them. We even took the injectors out of the FD car, sent it to him last year, and to clean them, and he's like, "This is pointless. These are working great. Absolutely zero problems. Cleaned them anyways. Here they are."
Yeah, that is another good thing about Tom too. Once you buy some injectors from him, he'll support you. So, and I always say it's a good idea, even in the wintertime, if you're running like methanol, ethanol, or any VP fuels that have ETBE, or I pronounced that wrong, MTBE. I think now ETBE maybe.
Yeah,
I don't know what the
it's E now in the Q, all those.
Yeah,
boutique
but
fuels.
any of that stuff that's going to be harsh on, fuel injectors and fuel pumps and all that stuff, don't let it sit in there for one. But if you use that type of fuel, it is a good idea to have them sent in and flow checked. That's the lifeline of your motor. That's what's fueling it. So why take a chance, blowing the thing up because you have an injector that's 20% down or something, that's,
or, $20, $30 or whatever it costs, whatever.
Yeah.
Putting fuel in the motor is the single most critical and accurate fuel in each cylinder is the single most critical thing to make your engine be reliable and live. Why would you cheap out on an injector?
It's the same people.
100%.
I don't understand it.
100%.
I don't understand it. You will put at risk a $5,000 to $15,000 or $5,000 to $25,000 engine to save $300, $200, $300 on a set of damn injectors. I just don't understand it.
The same thing with the guys, cutting corners on ECUs, and if it's controlling the amount of fuel going into your car, why? I mean, you're talking, you might save even if you're saving $1,000. Is that 20 grand engine worth that?
I did message Tom to see if he was available to hop on and maybe go a little more in depth on injectors. I haven't heard back from him yet.
He's playing daddy, I'm sure.
Is it daddy daycare?
I'm sure. I would be too. I wouldn't want to be hanging around with you guys if I hadn't I
don't even like hanging around with me.
I like hanging around with you, and that's pretty bad.
Well, I like hanging around with you because of your dog.
Hey, watch John Wick 3. You'll see a Malinois in action. 2 of them. Actually, Tom said thank you, but I'm not sure if he's going to make it on or not. I gave him the new link for the deal. We'll see if Tom gets on here or not. So
a question a second ago, back down. I can't find it on YouTube. I think it was Facebook, actually, about sensors you'd recommend on a specific build, and I missed the build now, but it looks like it was a boosted something. And a big thing I'm always going to say is fuel pressure. The number of guys that just don't run a freaking fuel pressure sensor. I don't know if that's true what you guys see, but
I see it. It says Brent Gettings, getting ready to wire my car. If you could pick a list of sensors, what would you want to monitor and what absolutely has to be monitored? SBC, large single, meth, 4L80, dual gates, single blow-off valve, Dominator profiler, BA 700s built for 40 plus pounds.
I mean, the big thing.
Does anybody want to start a list?
Right?
Do we have enough time left on the show?
Man.
Pretty much everything.
You do have a Dominator, so I'd fill dang analog inputs up with everything.
Yeah, I mean, if you let any of us, I'm sure we'll give us how many inputs, outputs you have. We'll use all of them and then tell you to go buy an expander and put more on it.
Yeah. I mean, I can start a few. I mean, obviously fuel pressure is one. Your generic sensors that are given, TPS, coolant temp, air temp.
Yeah, fuel pressure is built into the Holly. You just have to add the sensor.
I'm going to say add a second map sensor and measure your crankcase pressure. And a coolant pressure sensor. At least 2 of them, one on each side.
If guys aren't familiar with the Bosch combo sensor, it still takes 2 channels, but it's a pressure temperature sensor in one unit. So it minimizes the branches on your harness and minimizes how many sensors you have to have in there. Those are great for every oil, coolant. Coolant's a great one on a turbo stuff. Pick up lifting your head and blown head gaskets well before you melt an engine. Like there's one drift team I know that they're on there like their 5th engine in the last 2 years they've melted due to a blown head gasket.
Yep. On anything that has to deal with boost, anytime you can do coolant pressure, it's a huge benefit.
But put a Bosch combo sensor on there. You've already got coolant temperature. Just put the combo sensor on there. All it is extra wires on the same connector.
Another turbo shaft speed sensor would be another big one. Exhaust back pressure be another one. Then you can start getting into, depending on what transmission and stuff you're on, you can do converter drive pressure. You can do dump valves and stuff like that to monitor actual line pressures and everything else in the transmission as well.
All Wired wanted to know what we were recommending for the front wheel speed sensor, and we've used a lot of the Cherry Hall effect sensors.
I recommend just calling Bob and he'll put a billet reluctor behind the wheel hub and set up a Hall effect sensor for that. That's been one of my favorite mods that I've done to my personal car. It's a higher tooth count, so you have really good resolution.
I took mine and I epoxied in magnets on the hub of my Willwood brakes because my Willwoods actually have a stainless bolt so it doesn't pick up if I try to pick straight up off of it. And then I use an MSD 2348 to pick up the magnets. And I do it that way. I just build a little bracket that mounts right off the spindle.
Yep.
Andy Netherland, this is an interesting question because he's wondering what we think about the NGK Iridium plugs on a turbo LS build. It's a BR9 EIX for drag week. He says the plugs are difficult to change and trying to cut down on maintenance. I would not go into drag week thinking I was going to cut down on maintenance. I would get different headers to make it easier to change the plugs because it's drag week.
Or invent some custom tools of your own that get you the reach in there without having to do crazy shit.
Buy fireproof gloves and sleeves and just deal with it.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, there's other ways to do this. My drift driver lied to me. I just burned the shit out of myself.
But, I mean, I've got a big black Chevy in the shop right now that's the most miserable thing to put spark plugs in ever. And before I would ever take something like that on drag week, I would take the headers off, I'd throw them in the fucking dumpster, and I'd put a real header on it that I could change the spark plugs with.
Yep. Or have somebody build you a custom one that works better.
Yeah. The Camp 78 is wondering the best location for a coolant pressure sensor on an LS2.
Not anywhere on the engine. Not on the coolant port, the spare port on the passenger side head. Don't use that either because we've seen that the orifices in the head gaskets cause some turbulence in the cylinder head that will make the coolant pressure sensor really erratic, even if you do stand it off and remote mount it. All the cars that I've done that have it and it works very well on, the sensor has been remote mounted off of one of the radiator end tanks or off of the coolant reservoir. Obviously it has to be on the pressure side, not a puke tank. But you know, some cars have a remote reservoir with the pressure cap on. As long as it's remote mounted, you know, somewhere around the radiator, that's the best place that I've seen. And yes, I have actually seen some lift head information, and water doesn't compress. So if it lifts, you're going to see it if it's in the coolant system anywhere. So, but that's where it cuts down on most of the noise from my experience.
Pretty well instantly.
James, as you know about using the EGR pin for data logging air-fuel ratio on a stock PCM, are there any other inputs you would recommend doing the same process?
Yes, you can. There's, depending on what operating system you have on the stock ECU, some PIDs might not be attainable through your tuning software, but you know, there's a few others. AC pressure is another one. Fuel tank pressure is another one. All those are 0 to 5 volt inputs. You can even use the factory oil pressure sensor input if your car doesn't come equipped with that or isn't already hooked up to it. Case in point, like an F body, for instance, the oil pressure sending unit is wired directly to the gauge cluster. So there's no oil pressure information going to the PCM. So that leaves a 0 to 5 volt input for the oil pressure input. And that's actually a pretty good one to use because you can actually use an actual factory oil pressure sensor and then just log oil pressure, and it'll be whatever pressure you're using that particular sensor for. I've seen guys use them for fuel pressure. So you just log oil pressure and it's actually fuel pressure, for instance. So, but yeah, use your imagination. Anything that's 0 to 5 volt input and you have access to that information on your data logger, you can use that pin to data log the raw voltage and then create a math channel to scale it to your particular pressure transducer that you're using.
So it's getting to be that time of night, guys. I know that Scott's got things to do. I've got things to do. We ran pretty late because we started pretty late, but
again, I apologize for the lack of understanding of Facebook and shit they changed on our streaming service.
We got a full show, and it just took a little bit longer.
Yeah, just took a little bit to get going. But now I know what they changed and what I have to do for the next one, assuming they don't change it again.
Thank you, everybody, for listening in. Does John or James or Brian, anyone have anything to add before we head out for the night?
No, I'm good.
Good.
All right, you guys have a great week. We'll see you next week.
Good night, everybody. to tune electronic fuel injection live in person with the guys from RealTuners? We have 2-day courses in dyno shops all across the country. You can register for these at RealTuners.com and click on RealTuners Live Classes. For more information or to make a reservation, go to RealTuners.com or message us on Facebook at RealTuners LLC. Now, about those classes. When are they, you might ask? June 15th and 16th, a Level 2 Advanced course in Milwaukee, Wisconsin at Endless Performance. July 13th and 14th, an advanced standalone tuning class covering various ECUs at Full Throttle Speed in Detroit, Michigan. And of course, we will be trying to schedule more classes and more dates throughout the year, so keep checking back for more info. And remember, don't forget to have your host spayed or neutered.